Porphyria's Lover by Robert Browning. The rain set early in tonight, the sullen wind was soon awake. It tore the elm tops down for spite, and did its worst to vex the lake. I listened with heart fit to break. When glided in Porphyria, straight she shut the cold out in the storm, and kneeled and made the cheerless grate blaze up, and all the cottage warm. Which done, she rose, and from her form withdrew the dripping cloak and shawl, and laid her soiled gloves by, untied her hat, and let the damp hair fall. And last, she sat down by my side, and called me. When no voice replied, she put my arm about her waist, and made her smooth white shoulder bare, and all her yellow hair displaced, and, stooping, made my cheek lie there, and spread o'er all her yellow hair. Murmuring how she loved me, she too weak for all her heart's endeavor to set its struggling passion free from pride, and vainer ties to sever, and give herself to me forever. But passion sometimes would prevail, nor could tonight's gay feast restrain a sudden thought of one so pale for love of her, and all in vain. So she was come through wind and rain. Be sure I looked up at her eyes, happy and proud. At last I knew Porphyria worshipped me. Surprise made my heart swell, and still it grew, while I debated what to do. That moment she was mine, fair, perfectly pure and good. I found a thing to do, and all her hair in one long yellow string I wound 3 times her little throat around, and strangled her. No pain felt she. I am quite sure she felt no pain. As a shut bud that holds a bee, I warily opened her lids, again laughed the blue eyes without a stain, and I untightened next the tress about her neck. Her cheek once more blushed bright beneath my burning kiss. I propped her head up as before, only this time my shoulder bore her head, which droops upon it still. The smiling rosy little head, so glad it has its utmost will, that all it scorned at once is fled, and I, its love, am gained instead. Porphyria's love, she guessed not how her darling one wish would be heard. And thus we sit together now, and all night long we have not stirred, and yet God has not said a word. Born in 1812 to Christian parents near London, England, Robert Browning is often considered to be one of the most influential writers of the Victorian age. At the early age of 13, Browning was greatly influenced by poet Mary Shelley, and found her to be an inspiration for not only his work, but his life as well, when he briefly became an atheist and a liberal in the footsteps of his poetic idol. Though he is presently compared to fellow poets such as Alfred Lord Tennyson, his early work was fairly unsuccessful, as Browning did not begin to receive public recognition for his work until much later in his career, during the 1860s. Before that, in 1846, he married fellow poet Elizabeth Barrett, who attempted to help Browning through his writing struggles. It was during this time of his life, during his marriage to Elizabeth, that Browning wrote the poems he is most famous for today. These poems exhibited his famous development of the dramatic monologue style, which is thought to be his most significant contribution to the Victorian era. Biographer Thomas J. Collins also notes Browning's attention to Victorian themes such as progress, imperfection, and optimism in most, if not all, of his poetic works, despite often being associated with alternate eras of style, such as the Romantic period. In the Norton Anthology, Stephen Greenblatt notes the difficulty in determining exactly which era Browning would fit, mainly because of his seeming contentment with religion and his style, which seems to replicate Victorian prose rather than poetry. Nonetheless, there are still connections that can be made between Browning's poems and the era in which he was writing. Though Porphyria's Lover was written early in Browning's career, in 1834, it still remains one of his more well-known poems and exhibits several characteristics of the Victorian age. The time period was one of great change and uncertainty in that change. Britain's economy was certainly not in the best shape at the time due to the Industrial Revolution, which led to degenerating social and living conditions. The country was on the brink of revolution as the working class began to grow out of the poverty that was sweeping the streets. Factory working conditions were deplorable, with their long hours and dangerous atmospheres, and rotten boroughs were everywhere. The people were afraid of a number of things, as they found themselves stuck between two eras, not knowing what to do or where to go. Greenblatt notes that Victorians had a sense, too, of being displaced persons in a world made alien by technological changes that had been exploited too quickly for the adaptive powers of the human psyche. Porphyria's lover exhibits this fear in its attention to the evils apparent in human nature. The narrator is so in love with Porphyria that he murders her to preserve their relationship, exposing an inner evil that very well may be characteristic of all humans. With the utilitarian movement of the mid-1880s by Jeremy Bentham, the Victorians were beginning to question religion and look at the Bible more objectively. This led to a questioning of good and evil, as Browning examines in the poem. The relationship between the narrator and his lover is also inherently Victorian, because it was forbidden by their respective social statuses. Porphyria tells him that she has overcome great social distances to be with him. She's too weak, for all her heart's endeavor, to set its struggling passion free from pride and vainer ties dissever, and give herself to me forever. This was a characteristic of the Middle Victorian period, after the economic struggles had been addressed. There was a new fixed set of manners established by the middle class, to which people were expected to adhere to. It's likely that the narrator realized these stringent restrictions would limit their love to this one night, inspiring his evil need to preserve the moment by strangling his beloved. Robert Browning certainly contributed not only to the Victorian era through his exploration of these themes, but to poetry as a medium of expression through his development of the dramatic monologue.